Sure. So, up until recently, companies like PatchStack are able to make security obtainable for the common user. Back when I was still at StackPath, and what kind of led to me ultimately building Rocket was configuring a WAF is very difficult. Um, so I wanted to create this like all-in-one solution that with a security first approach for WordPress users. And that's where kind of bringing Cloudflare Enterprise to market. And ultimately, you know I think it should be completely on the host to at least guide. I mean, we have a responsibility, right? So like just like all the agencies that have to manage these customer websites, we're managing the agency's livelihood as well as the livelihood of their customers. So, for me, I think it's just unacceptable that, somebody, we obviously can't block everything and protect everything. We do take a very proactive approach. Whenever we see something suspicious, we have a shared Slack channel with PatchStack to like, hey, have you guys seen anything like this? And we've kind of like just sort of accidentally created this like feedback loop with Monarchs and PatchStack and some industry leaders to, even if it's a competitor, right? Like we've been responsible when there was a massive bricks exploit, we worked with Immunify 360 to get a rule deployed as soon as possible, which ended up saving the entire world that used Immunify 360, right? So it's not just about, oh, Rocket's the only secure, hosting.com's the only secure, right? I think we're just, especially with AI and all of these new automated pen testing tools that are coming out, I think we're seeing more exploits than we could have ever imagined, and in 0 days, and I think we're getting to a place where the hosts just, there shouldn't be a choice, right? Like you shouldn't if your hosting provider isn't providing some sort of web application firewall or OAuth top 10 protection or malware scanning, you really need to go find a host that does, because it's just it's more important than ever now with all of this automated stuff. So that's where, from a hosting perspective, we do a network layer, which is with Cloudflare's WAF. We have an origin layer, which is a little more context into the request itself, which is now effectively Monarchs for malware and WAF as well. But then what we're doing with PatchStack is now we're getting into the application layer, so that way we actually have a full 360-degree coverage for the customer. But we want to do it in a little bit different of an approach by adding as much value to these packages as possible. So like I want to be in a world where an agency comes to hosting.com, they deploy their new project, it's already got PatchStack installed, they've got Monarchs protection, and we're giving them the best possible solution that we can, and it just works for them, right? So I think especially now it's more important than ever for the hosting companies to step up and really put focus on the security. And to Oliver's earlier point, not just WordPress, right? Laravel and all of these different tools out there are just as important and just as exposed, if not more, right?
Um, I had a second thought about like this something that you mentioned already when you did an intro to this is like agencies blaming hosts and when things don't go south, right? I think this blaming part is also in a way wrong, right? Because ultimately it's a question of responsibility and whether like I give a responsibility of something to someone and whether this someone is also accepting this responsibility. So the moment when someone is going to blame, let's say an agency going and blame hosting company or a security vendor or whoever for a failure of security, that always shows a conflict between uh, a mismatch of responsibility passed forward and received. So when you're when you go into this when this kind of a situation happens, when you're basically when a website is getting hacked and then a customer is going to a hosting company is like, hey, what the hell, then I think it's a good question to also ask, like, did the hosting company ever accepted the responsibility that they were responsible for the security? And a lot of the hosting companies don't. So I think this is a good question to have when you're going to look for a hosting company. Is like, hey, I'm going to host my website with you. Are you taking this responsibility? Because if they are saying no, then you should never kind of like sleep tight. You're fine. because you have this responsibility still on you.
Do.
I think an important thing to maybe ask from your host as well is like, what are their actual existing relationships with security companies? Uh, because if they are saying like, oh, there's none, then they are missing a lot of information. Like Ben said in the beginning, like, they have, this shared Slack channel with Monarchs and like with PatchStack, and when there was an incident, they shared information with Immunify 360, and like, all this information going back and forth, having these relationships. If your host doesn't have these relationships, then even if a 0 day is going, nuts, like we had like a few weeks ago, right? There was a 0 day in a similar product like WP Umbrella in a different one. Then, it was, mass attacked, or like like websites were taken over, in thousands. And if like what we did, we notified all of the hosting partners, like, hey, this is happening, here's all this information. If your hosting company doesn't have even this relationship with any of the security companies, then they don't even know that it's happening. They have absolutely nothing to kind of like notify you on about, or even kind of like take any kind of measures. So this is maybe another thing that they would look into, like how active the hosting company is in the community. And if they're super isolated and they are not talking to different hosts and they're not talking to security companies, then I think that is not in their benefit, really.